I exhaled, looking at the perfectly set table. The dishes I'd only brought out for special occasions shone in the light of the chandelier. In the center of the table, like the centerpiece, stood a Victorian secretaire, my last major piece of work. 4 months of painstaking labor, endless hours spent restoring carved elements, selecting the right materials, recreating the original finish. This secretaire should have been my pride, a testament to a lifetime of craftsmanship. Instead, it witnessed my defeat. The clock on the wall read 15 to 7. The kids would be here soon. I took another look at my hand, a slight tremor, almost imperceptible to the outsider's eye, but so obvious to me. I'd learned to disguise it over the past weeks, holding my glass tighter, resting my elbow on the table, hiding my hands under the table. Little tricks so no one would notice. But tonight, it's going to be different. Tonight, I'm going to tell them the truth. The doorbell rang at 7 sharp. Garland's punctuality was always predictable. "Mom!" His voice sounded too cheerful, too forced, as it always did when he rarely visited me. "You look great." It was a lie, and we both knew it. Dark circles under my eyes that even makeup couldn't hide, sharpened features from the weight loss, the effects of sleepless nights and stress. But Garland was used to saying what he felt needed to be said. "Thank you, darling." I accepted his sloppy kiss on the cheek and glanced at Brisley, his wife, who had already slipped into the house and was assessing the interior. Her eyes lingered on the secretaire. "What's that? A new acquisition?" she asked with feigned interest. "My latest restoration," I answered discreetly. "It looks expensive." Her tone changed when she realized it wasn't just old furniture, but a valuable antique. 10 minutes later, Flanders, the perpetually late, perpetually busy youngest daughter of mine, pulled up. She entered with a bunch of wildflowers and a bottle of wine, avoiding, as always, looking me directly in the eye. "Sorry I'm late, Mom." A client held up. I knew it wasn't true. Flanders just hated family gatherings and was delaying the moment when she'd have to pretend to be a happy family. We sat down at the table and I could feel the tension building. Garland immediately took the lead in the conversation, talking about his new construction project, his problems with contractors, and his plans to expand his business. Brisley inserted comments about the expensive houses she'd sold last week. Flanders was silent, occasionally nodding in agreement and idly picking at her food. They didn't ask how I was feeling, didn't ask what I'd been doing the last few months. To them, I was a stage set in my own home. When it was time to pour the wine, I felt the trembling in my hand intensify. The bottle seemed incredibly heavy and the glasses seemed fragile and unstable. I took a deep breath and picked up the bottle. "Let me help," Flandre offered suddenly, noticing my confusion. "No, I can handle it," I replied, feeling panic rising inside. The bottle shook in my hand, wine splashing over the rim of the first glass. Droplets of red wine spread like blood across the white tablecloth. "Mom, are you okay?" Flanders finally asked as I struggled to fill the third glass. The moment had come. I set the bottle down and looked at my children. "I have Parkinson's," I said without preamble, and the words hung heavy in the air. The reaction was immediate and telling. Garland frowned at first, a flicker of irritation in his eyes that he immediately tried to hide behind a mask of concern. "God, Mom, are you sure?" His voice sounded concerned, but something in it was fake, like the performance of a mediocre actor. Brisley looked stunned, but quickly pulled herself together. "I'm so sorry, Edith," she said with a look on her face that was more suited to a condolence call at a funeral. Flanders just froze, clutching her wine glass tighter, as if it were her salvation. She didn't say a word, just stared past me. "I was diagnosed 3 weeks ago," I continued. "Dr. Rose says it's still in the early stages, but—" "What now?" Garland interrupted. "You can't work, right? With your tremor." I could hear what he was trying to hide in his voice. Frustration. Not concern for my health, but annoyance at the inconvenience my diagnosis would cause him. "I can still work," I countered, feeling the protective walls building around my heart. "Just not as quickly, and not with such complicated projects. And there are medications to help control the symptoms." First there was shock, then denial. I couldn't believe it. Me, A master restorer with hands that could restore the most fragile wood carvings, bring back to life objects others had discarded. I was losing control of my movements. At home, I burst into tears for the first time in years. Cried over the unfinished secretaire, over every line that was now harder to draw, over every movement that required effort. I was angry at my body that had betrayed me, at the fate that had chosen this particular disease for a man whose life and work depended on the precision of his hands. Still, I finished the secretaire. It took twice as long as usual. I worked in the mornings when the tremors weren't as bad, invented new ways to hold my tools, learned to take breaks and not berate myself for being slow. This secretaire became more than just a job. It became a challenge that I accepted and conquered. Garland's voice brought me back to the present. Have you thought about what comes next? It's a progressive disease, isn't it? Yes, it's progressive, I confirmed. But the rate of progression is different for everyone, and there are many ways to control the symptoms. It might be hard for you to manage the house, Brisley said carefully, watching my reaction. A house that big requires constant upkeep. I'm doing fine. My voice sounded firmer than I'd expected. For now, maybe. Garland leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. But what about 6 months from now? A year from now? We have to think ahead, Mother. Dinner continued in a tense atmosphere. The conversation jumped from topic to topic, but I felt that my diagnosis had changed everything. Garland became more attentive, but his attention wasn't on me, but on my house, my workshop, my things. Brisley mentioned several times, as if incidentally, her clients who were so fortunate to have sold big houses and moved into smaller apartments. You know, these days, people are choosing simpler, less cluttered places to live, she said as she dressed her salad. Especially when the kids are grown and there's no need for more space. I listened in silence, watching my children and my daughter-in-law circle around the topic that really interested them, my property and my future, which they were already planning without me. Flanders barely participated in the conversation. She sat staring at her plate, only occasionally casting concerned glances at me. I knew my youngest daughter. She avoided conflict and difficult emotions, preferring to withdraw rather than face the issue. I got up to put the plates away, feeling the anger give me strength. Mom, leave it, I'll help. Flanders suddenly volunteered, taking the initiative for the first time all evening. I'm not an invalid yet, I said more sharply than I meant to, and Flanders recoiled as if I'd hit her. I reached for the dessert plate, the crystal one I'd gotten from my grandmother. My hands trembled treacherously. The dish slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor with a deafening clang. The silence that followed was almost palpable. I stared at the shards of Crystal A family heirloom that had survived 2 world wars and was now shattered by my clumsy hands. You see, Garland said quietly, and there was no sympathy in his voice, just a cold statement of fact. You can't even hold the dishes. How are you going to live alone? Brisley, sensing the moment, picked up on it immediately. Edith, dear, maybe you really should think about some place that will help you. There are wonderful assisted living facilities for the elderly. I'm not moving into a nursing home. I cut her off. No one's talking about a nursing home. Brisley paused, searching for words. More like a residence for people who need a little help. Mom, be reasonable, Garland went on the offensive. This house is too big for you. It costs money to maintain. You don't need the workshop now. Sell the house while real estate prices are high. The money will provide you with a comfortable life and the care you'll need. I looked at my son. His eyes were burning, and I saw calculation, not concern. He was already mentally dividing the proceeds of the sale. Suddenly, Flanders jumped up, muttering something about finding a broom, and disappeared into the kitchen. Typical Flan, avoiding conflict at all costs. I stood among the shards, looking at my children, and suddenly realized with piercing clarity, I was old furniture to them, old furniture that should be written off. Uncomfortable, taking up space, needing maintenance, and yet containing valuable parts that could be sold or used. How ironic. All my life I've been bringing old, discarded things back to life, finding beauty and value in them when others saw only trash. And now I myself have become such a thing for my own children. It was 3 weeks after that fateful family dinner. The kids hadn't called. Only Flanders had sent a brief text asking how I was feeling, to which I'd responded with an equally brief, "I'm fine." I preferred to manage on my own. I had been independent all my life, raising my children, running my home, running my own business. The diagnosis should not have changed me so much that I had to rely on those who saw me as a burden. The workshop became my refuge and my challenge at the same time. I turned down major new commissions, explaining to clients that I was taking a break to refresh the workshop. I didn't have the courage to admit that my hands could no longer guarantee the same quality. Instead, I focused on minor repairs and consultations, work that I was still able to do. I spent an hour each morning just holding tools in my hands, getting reacquainted with their weight and shape. My fingers, which for decades had felt the slightest imperfections in the wood, now seemed foreign. Some days the tremor was barely noticeable, and I could work almost as before. Other days my hands shook so badly that I couldn't even hold a cup of coffee. On one of these bad days, as the rain drummed on the roof of the workshop and I stared helplessly at the unfinished carving of an antique frame, there was a knock at the door. It was Quintus Lattimore, my neighbor, a former carpenter whose house was across the street from mine. "Terrible weather, isn't it?" he said, shaking the drops off his threadbare jacket. He was holding a small wooden box. "I thought you might take a look at this thing. The lock's jammed, and it's a shame to throw it away. Nice handmade work." I knew it was an excuse. Quintus was too skilled a craftsman to fail with a simple lock. But I was grateful for the gesture. He was treating me like a professional, not a patient. "Sure, let's take a look." I took the box in my hands, feeling the familiar wood grain. Mahogany, handmade, probably 30s of the last century. Diamond-eyed. Quintus smiled. "I've always wondered how you tell age from a single glance." "Years of practice." I set the box on my desk and tried to open the lock. My fingers wouldn't listen. The tremors intensified with the strain. Quintus noticed, but pretended to look at the tools on the wall. "I get arthritis in this weather too," he said casually. "You know what helps?" I adapted the tool handles, wrapped them in leather and made them thicker, better grip. It wasn't pity or condescension. Quintus spoke like master to master, sharing professional cunning. I was relieved. Finally, someone who understood what the loss of skills meant to me. "Thanks for the advice," I said sincerely. "I'll give it a try." After he left, I took a long look at my hands. They had failed me, yes. But maybe I could learn to work in a new way. The next day, Garland arrived. Unannounced, as usual. I was just experimenting with new tool handles, following Quintus's advice. "Mom!" He entered the workshop without knocking, too loud, too energetic. "How are you feeling?" "Fine," I replied, putting away my tools. "What brings you here on a weekday?" Garland smiled his business smile that I knew so well. "I wanted to talk to you about something important." He looked around the workshop. "But not here. Let's do it in the house, over a cup of tea." In the living room, Garland sat in the chair across from me, leaning forward as he always did when he wanted to appear sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about your situation, Mother," he began. "About your illness, about your future. You must realize that you will need serious treatment, perhaps special care. It costs money." "I have savings," I said, "and health insurance." "Which doesn't cover half the cost of specialized care," Garland objected. "Do you know how much a private caregiver costs? Or rehabilitation programs? Thousands of dollars a month. Your savings won't last long." I felt a chill run down my spine. Garland was right. My savings, though not insignificant for a woman of my stature, could be depleted quickly with serious medical expenses. "Where were you going with this?" I asked him directly. "I have a proposition." Garland's eyes took on the glint I'd seen in his eyes when he talked about his projects. An investment opportunity. A construction project in the northern part of the city. A business-class residential complex. Potential profit, up to 30% of the investment. "I don't know about investments, Garland. That's why I'm here." He put the file on the table. "I can manage your money, invest it for maximum profit. The project is practically guaranteed profit. The neighborhood is growing. The demand for housing is high. In a year and a half, your savings will grow so much that you won't have to worry about medical expenses." I opened the folder. Glossy renderings of apartment buildings, graphs of rising real estate prices, tables of numbers that told me little. Why did you come to me with this? Aren't there other investors? Of course there are. Garland got a little nervous. But I thought of you first. It's a great way to secure your future. Money has to work, Mom, especially now that. He paused, looking at my hands, which were trembling slightly on the folder. When I can't anymore, I finished for him. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. It's just that you have to think about the future now. You don't want to become a burden to us, do you? There it was, the pressure on my greatest fear, becoming dependent, helpless, burdening my children. How much do I need to invest? I asked, already knowing Garland had won. Optimally, 100,000, he said as casually as if he were buying groceries. That would give you a good stake in the project and a profit. 100,000. Almost all of my savings. The money I'd been saving all my life, saving for everything, denying myself trips, new clothes, small pleasures. Money that was supposed to be my old age insurance. I need to think about it, I said. Sure, Mom, Garland smiled. Just not for too long. Opportunities like this don't wait. I spent the next 3 days in doubt. Part of me knew that Garland was right with my diagnosis. I would need money for treatment. The other part of me was afraid to risk everything I had. I called an old acquaintance who worked at a bank, but he had little to say about Garland's particular project other than generalities about the risks of investing. On the 4th day, I made up my mind. If I could no longer work with my hands, let my money work. I called Garland. I agree, I said, but I need a guarantee. Of course, he replied. I'll bring all the documents tomorrow. The paperwork was more complicated than I expected. Pages of legal terms I could barely understand. Garland explained, but his explanations were as confusing as the papers themselves. In the end, I signed a power of attorney giving him access to my main account. Don't worry, Mom, he said, tucking the papers into his briefcase. I'll take care of everything. Now you don't have to worry about the future. For the first time in weeks, I was relieved. Maybe everything would be okay. Maybe Garland really did want to help. A month passed. I adjusted to my new routine. Exercise in the mornings, light work in the workshop, phone consultations. My clients, recognizing my condition, began bringing small, uncomplicated items for restoration. A gesture of kindness I appreciated more than they could have imagined. Quintus came by regularly, always with some excuse. He would bring a piece of rare wood or ask for advice on an antique sideboard he supposedly found at a flea market. I knew he was checking up on me to see how I was doing, but I appreciated his delicacy. On one of these visits, Quintus seemed to mention in passing, "Saw your son yesterday, driving a brand new pickup truck. That's a serious car." "A new pickup truck?" I asked him again. He hadn't said anything about buying a car. "Maybe it's for business," Quint shrugged. "Looks more like a rich guy's toy, though. Chrome shiny everywhere, huge wheels. Something tugged at me. Garland's always liked expensive things, but a new car now that he was supposedly putting everything into a construction project. Speaking of his business," Quint continued casually, "my niece works in the city administration, in the Department of Building Permits. She says there are problems with that plot of land in the north of the city. There's something about the groundwater, and the environmentalists are against the development." "Are you sure this is the right project?" I asked, feeling my heart start to beat faster. "I don't know," Quint answered honestly. "It was just a coincidence of time and place. I could have been wrong. But I had a feeling he wasn't wrong, and that Garland's new pickup wasn't a coincidence." That same evening, I called my bank. The woman on the other end of the line politely informed me that she couldn't provide account information over the phone for security reasons. I would need to come in person with identification. The next morning, I was at the bank, standing in front of a young female employee who looked at me with professional sympathy. "Mrs. Malmsteen, you have $8,140 left in your main account," she said, looking at the monitor. Most of the funds were transferred to the Malmsteen construction account on the 23rd of last month. 8,000 out of 150,000. I asked for a printout of the transactions, and once I got it, drove straight to Garland's office. His secretary tried to stop me, saying Mr. Malmsteen had an important meeting, but I walked past her into the office. Garland was sitting at his desk, talking on the phone. When he saw me, he acted surprised and quickly ended the conversation. Mom, what a surprise. Is something wrong? I put the printout from the bank on his desk. Explain this. Garland looked at the paper and his face changed. Surprise changed to annoyance, then to a business mask. Oh, that. Yes, I transferred the money to the company's account as we agreed, to invest in the project. My entire account, Garland, almost all of my savings. That's how investments work, Mom. His tone became condescending. You put money in to make a profit. What about the new pickup truck? Is that part of the investment too? Garland tensed. I don't know what you mean. You were seen driving a new car, and it came right after you got access to my money. That's ridiculous. He stood up, walking around the table. The car was leased to the company for business travel. And anyway, I don't have to account to you for every purchase. What about the problems with the building permit? With the environmentalists? I felt the trembling in my hands intensify, but now from anger, not sickness. Garland froze for a second, then laughed. Are you spying on me? Listening to gossip? Yes, there are some delays in the paperwork. That's normal in the construction business. It's nothing serious. I want my money back, Garland. His face has changed. The mask of the caring son disappeared, revealing cold calculation. That's impossible. The money's already invested. It's a risky investment, Mom. You knew that when you signed the papers. I trusted you with my savings. And I'm making the most of it, he said. It's just that right now, temporarily unavailable. I looked at my son, the man I'd given birth to, raised, sacrificed everything for, and I saw a stranger. A cold, calculating man who didn't hesitate to deceive his own mother. If you have health problems, go to the insurance company. You're a grown woman, it's your business, said Garland, returning to the table. I have a meeting right now. Call me when you've calmed down. I walked out of his office feeling devastated. The drive home was a blur. Only when I crossed the threshold of my workshop did I let myself realize the horror of the situation. I had lost all my savings. And worst of all, my own son had taken them. Spring in Bowman has always been my favorite time of year. But this year it brought with it not joy, but a hard realization of my new reality. Each day it became more difficult for me to perform my usual activities. My morning cup of coffee became a challenge. I couldn't get it to my mouth without spilling half of it. Buttoning buttons became an agonizing process that took up precious minutes. That afternoon, I sat in Dr. Rose's waiting room, looking at my hands. They were trembling more than usual. The tremors were getting worse, despite the medications I was taking with meticulous precision. Edith, Dr. Rose called me into her office, and I could tell by the look on her face that the news wasn't good. She spoke calmly and professionally, but the bottom line was disappointing. The disease was progressing faster than expected. The standard therapy was not having the desired effect. It was necessary to change the treatment regimen, increase dosages, add new drugs. How much would it cost? I asked, knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Dr. Rose gave me a figure that took my breath away. Even with my insurance, the extra cost was astronomical for someone who had lost all his savings. There are assistance programs, she added, noticing my reaction. But the approval process is lengthy, and you need to start a new treatment as soon as possible. I walked out of the clinic with prescriptions for medications I couldn't afford. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I felt real fear for the first time. Not for my health, but for the future. What would happen to me when I couldn't pay for treatment? On the way home, I decided to call Garland. Our last conversation in his office had ended unpleasantly, but now the situation was critical. After all, it was my own money entrusted to my son. He answered after the fifth ring, his voice sounding distant. Mom? What's wrong? I need to talk to you, in person. It's important. This isn't a good time. I have meetings all day. It's about my health, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. And the money I entrusted you with. Okay, I'll come by tonight. Garland showed up at almost 8 when I was beginning to think he wasn't coming. He entered the house without knocking as he always did. But this time he didn't even try to act happy to see me. I can only give you 15 minutes. I have another meeting. At 8 p.m.? I couldn't hide my sarcasm. Business doesn't stop when the sun goes down, Mom. He walked into the living room and sat down, glancing defiantly at his watch. So what have you got? I gathered all my dignity and calmly told him about the doctor's visit, the need for new treatment, the expenses I had ahead of me. I need some of my money back, Garland. Not all of it, just for the treatment. About 30,000 now and another 30,000 in the next few months. Garland listened to me with an impenetrable expression. When I finished, he sighed with theatrical regret. Mom, I understand your situation, but you have to understand mine. The money is invested in the project. It's not sitting in an account where I can just withdraw it. But it's my money, Garland. Money that I've been saving all my life. That you trusted me to invest. His voice grew colder, and I'm doing everything I can to make that investment worthwhile. But business is business. The market is unstable right now. The project is delayed. I saw your new pickup truck. I interrupted him. Don't talk to me about market instability. Garland's face changed. The mask of the caring but busy son had fallen away, revealing what lay beneath it: cold indifference. I don't have to account to you for my personal expenses. The car is on credit. And as for your money, it's invested in the business and now it's gone. Garland, I need money for treatment. I can't. Your health is not my problem, he said as calmly as if he were giving a weather report. I'm in financial trouble of my own. The project is in jeopardy. The lenders are demanding repayment of loans. I can't pull money out of the business now, even if I wanted to. I stared at him, not believing my ears. My son, my boy, the one I raised alone after my husband died, the one I gave everything to, telling me that my health was not his concern. You stole my money, I said quietly. Don't be dramatic. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. You signed the papers yourself. I didn't steal anything. Now I have to go. Garland, please, my voice trembled. I'm your mother. He stopped in the doorway without turning around. And that's the only reason I'm still paying for your basic insurance. Don't ask for more. I don't have any. The door closed behind him, and I was alone in an empty house that suddenly felt huge and cold. It was as if something inside me had been severed, the last thread tying me to the illusion of a caring family. The ringing of the phone snapped me out of my daze. It was Flanders, my youngest. She called rarely, and usually with some kind of request. Mom, can you babysit Amber on Saturday? Richard and I have theater tickets, and the babysitter's sick. Amber, my granddaughter, 6 years old, rambunctious and curious. How long has it been since I've seen her? A month? 2? Sure. What time should I bring her in? Actually. Flanders hesitated. We were thinking you could come to us. You know, Amber will sleep better in her own bed. Familiar surroundings. I sensed a catch. It wasn't about Amber's comfort. Flanders just didn't want the baby in my dilapidated house. Okay, I'll come over. Flanders' house greeted me with the sounds of baby laughter. Amber rushed to me with a joyful squeal, and for a moment the world was brighter. I hugged my granddaughter, trying not to show how my hands were trembling. Grandma, I missed you. She rambled on, talking about school, about her new doll, about how Daddy had taught her to ride a bicycle. When Flanders and Richard left, Amber dragged me to show me her room, her toys, her drawings. I listened to her chatter, savoring the moment of simple, unconditional acceptance that only children can give. Grandma, why don't you make beautiful things out of wood anymore? I heard Mom talking about it. She suddenly asked, looking at my hands. Grandma's hands are a little sore, honey, I replied, not wanting to tell a 6-year-old about Parkinson's disease. Like Mr. Johnson next door? His hands are shaking too. Mommy says he's very old and will die soon. A child's directness can sometimes be ruthless. No, not like Mr. Johnson. And Grandma's not going to die anytime soon. Amber smiled in relief. Good, because Daddy said that when you die, we're going to live in your house. And I don't like your house. It's ugly and old. It's like the world stopped. Dad said that? Yes. Amber had lost interest in the subject and was pulling me toward her dolls. He told Mommy that Uncle Garland promised him part of the house when you were sent to the old folks' home. I don't want to live in your house, Grandma. It smells like wood and old things. I looked at my granddaughter, repeating adult words without understanding their meaning, and felt another illusion crumble. Not just Garland, but Flanders and her husband, all of them had already shared my home, my life. When Flanders and Richard returned, I was exhausted physically and emotionally. Amber was already asleep, and I was sitting in the living room staring at nothing. Is everything okay? Flanders asked, noticing my condition. Yeah, just tired. Amber is a very energetic child. Do you need help getting home? Richard offered with fake concern in his voice. Thanks, I'll drive myself. By the way, Flanders, I need to talk to you. Alone. Richard left the room, muttering something about checking his email. What's wrong? Flanders looked worried. I need money for treatment, I said bluntly. Garland took all my savings and refuses to return even a fraction of it. Flanders swallowed, her face showing her inner struggle. He said something about problems with the project. I'm not asking for much. Just for the first course of treatment. I'll pay you back when I can. Maybe you should sell the house. It's too big for one person, and it's expensive to maintain. So that's what this is about. She, like Garland, was thinking about my house, not my health. Amber said that you and Richard are already planning to move into my house when I'm sent to the old folks' home, I said calmly, just stating a fact. Flanders flinched, her face pale. Children often misunderstand adult conversations. Don't bother. I stood up, feeling strangely calm. I understood. Thanks for tonight. On the way home, I was overwhelmed not so much by grief as by rage and frustration. All my life I'd given without expecting anything in return. And now, when I really needed help, my children had turned their backs on me. Quintus was waiting for me at home. He was sitting on the porch steps holding a paper bag. I thought I'd stop by and check on you, he said, getting up. Brought some homemade pie. My late wife always said there was no problem that couldn't be alleviated with a piece of good pie. I looked at this man, practically a stranger, showing more concern than my own children, and I couldn't hold back the tears. What's wrong? He asked, clearly not expecting such a reaction to the pie. Over a cup of tea, I told him everything. About the conversation with Garland, about Amber's words, about Flandre's reaction. Quintus listened without interrupting, only his wrinkled face grew sterner. It sucks, he said when I was done. I don't know what to do. Without treatment, the disease will progress faster. But treatment costs so much money. First, Quintus cut off a piece of pie and put it on my plate. Tomorrow, we'll go to the clinic and find out about patient assistance programs. Second, I know a good lawyer who specializes in these cases. It might not be too late to get your money back. The next few days became an endless series of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Quint was there to help us understand medical programs, fill out forms, and look for alternative treatment options. We met with an attorney, an older woman with a keen eye and a bulldog reputation in legal circles. She honestly told us that getting the money back would be difficult, but not impossible. The key is to act quickly before the funds disappear completely, and be prepared to sue her own son. The lawsuit against Garland was moving slowly. The lawyer warned it could take months, even years, and I needed the money for treatment now. Quint had helped me access some social programs, but they only covered a fraction of what was needed. I was facing a dilemma I never expected to encounter in my life. How do you survive when your own children have stolen your future? The solution came unexpectedly. One morning, while going through old albums of photos of my work, I came across a shot of a Regency-era dresser I had restored nearly 15 years earlier. It was a complicated job. Restoring marquetry, replacing hardware, reconstructing carved elements. The client, an elderly collector from San Francisco, was thrilled and paid generously. I remembered him saying, "Edith, your hands are worth more than gold. In 20 years, this work will be worth a fortune." I wondered. In a career spanning nearly 40 years, I had restored hundreds of antiques. Some of them were truly valuable, rare, historically significant pieces that became even more valuable after my restoration. What if the collector was right? That same day, I called Maurice Keller, an old friend and owner of an antique store in Billings. We had once worked together a lot. I restored items for his store. He recommended me to clients. "Edith!" His voice sounded surprised and pleased. "How many years? How many winters? To what do I owe this surprise?" I explained the situation without going into details of family problems. I simply said that I couldn't work anymore because of my illness and wanted to know if my past works had any value on the market. Your work? Morris laughed. Honey, do you have any idea how the market has changed in recent years? Antiques with a history of restoration by famous masters are now valued twice or even three times as much, and you have always been one of the best. If you still have contacts of owners or photos of works, I can make some calls. Over the next week, I cataloged my most significant restorations, the ones I had done for private collectors and could track. Some of the photos were accompanied by the owner's contacts. Others were just memories captured in yellowed snapshots. Morris kept his word. He made a few calls and the results exceeded expectations. 3 collectors expressed interest in purchasing items I had once restored. Several others were interested in consulting services. They wanted me to assess the condition of their antiques. Listen, Edith, Maurice said when he came to me with the first results. You can turn this into a real business. Consultations, appraisals, valuations. You don't have to work with your hands. Your knowledge and experience are enough. I looked at my trembling hands. They could no longer hold delicate tools, could no longer create miniature parts or polish wood to a mirror shine. But my brain, my experience, my knowledge, they were still with me. I think you're right, I said. But first I need to sort out the finances and some legal matters. 2 days later, Maurice returned with startling news. One of the collectors for whom I had once restored an 18th century bureau cylinder was willing to pay a substantial sum for advice on a new purchase. Another offered to buy back from the first owner a dressing table I had restored 10 years earlier and wanted my confirmation of the work's authenticity. The money from the initial consultations allowed me to pay for a course of treatment and put some aside for the future. But more importantly, they gave me back a sense of confidence and control over my own life. Alongside this, I met with a lawyer, but not the woman who had handled the case against Garland. It was Everton Cliff, a low-key older man with a reputation as the best probate lawyer in the Tri-County area. His office was located in an old building downtown, with no signage or advertising. He took clients only by referral, and Quint had somehow managed to arrange a meeting. Mrs. Malmsteen, Cliff said quietly and slowly, as if weighing each word, I understand your situation. Unfortunately, cases like yours are not uncommon in my practice. Children awaiting an inheritance sometimes behave inappropriately. I want to change the will, I said bluntly. A complete revision of the distribution of the estate. That's your right, he nodded. But given the circumstances, your diagnosis, and the ongoing litigation, we have to be extremely careful. Any change in the will could be challenged by your son on the grounds that you were incapacitated when it was made. What do you suggest? A full medical examination of your capacity before making a new will, videotaping of the signing process, witnesses who have no personal interest in your inheritance, and possibly a written explanation of the reasons for changing your will, notarized. Over the next few weeks, I underwent a medical examination that confirmed my full capacity despite my physical limitations. Cliff prepared all the paperwork, and in the presence of 3 witnesses, including Quint, I signed the new will. My hand was shaking more than usual. Excitement exacerbated the symptoms, but the signature was valid. Congratulations, Cliff said when the formalities were complete. Your will is now legally protected. In parallel with my legal affairs, I continued to develop my consulting business. Maurice was right. My knowledge and experience was highly valued by collectors and dealers of antiques. I could no longer work with my hands, but I could determine the authenticity of an object, assess the quality of restoration, and give advice on care and storage. It didn't bring in as much income as active restoration, but it allowed me to feel useful and, more importantly, independent. Of course, Garland noticed the changes. At first, it was small things. I stopped complaining about my lack of money, started wearing new clothes, once even mentioned plans to install a new heating system in the house. You look better, he remarked during one of his rare visits. Is the treatment helping? Yes, I answered evasively. I found a good doctor. And how are you paying for the treatment? He sounded suspicious. Social programs, I lied, and a little part-time counseling. Garland frowned. Counseling? In your condition? Mom, You shouldn't overexert yourself. It could be dangerous. I know my limits, I said calmly. And I feel better when I'm working. After that conversation, his visits became more frequent. He showed up unannounced, often with Brisley, who was exaggeratedly attentive, asking how I was feeling, offering to help around the house, even trying to cook for me, all things she hadn't done in years. "We're worried about you, Mom," Garland said, pacing my living room with the air of a host. "Living alone, the disease is progressing. What if you fall, or you can't call for help?" "I have a panic button," I pointed to the bracelet on my wrist that Quintus insisted I wear. "And the neighbors stop by regularly." "Neighbors aren't family," Brisley interjected. "Family is supposed to take care of you." "Really?" I couldn't contain my sarcasm. "Where was that concern when I needed money for treatment?" Garland pretended not to hear. "Brisley and I were thinking, maybe you should move in with us. We have a big house, a guest room on the first floor, no stairs, all the amenities." "And what would happen to my house? The workshop?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "You could rent it out? Or sell it, if it's too burdensome to maintain. The money would go toward your medical care," Garland said in a businesslike tone, as if he'd already made up his mind. "I'm not selling the house," I cut him off. "And I'm not moving. I'm doing just fine on my own." "But Mom, be reasonable," Garland raised his voice. "You can't live alone with Parkinson's. It's dangerous." "And yet, I'm living, and I'll keep on living." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm doing fine." After that, Garland changed tactics. Instead of directly offering to move out, he insisted on a legal power of attorney A document that would give him the authority to make financial and medical decisions for me, in the event my condition worsened. "It's just a formality," he assured me. "Standard practice in such cases. If something happens to you, someone should have the legal right to help." "I already have a medical directive," I replied, "and a fiduciary to make financial decisions in the event of incapacity." "Who?" Garland looked startled. "Don't tell me you entrusted this to a stranger instead of your own son." "Not a stranger. Quintus Lathamore." I watched his face change from surprise to anger. "He's my friend and neighbor, and the only person who's ever really helped me when I needed it." Garland jumped up, his face red with rage. "Are you out of your mind? Trusting everything to some old man you barely know? He's just using you. He's hoping for an inheritance. Unlike you, who stole my savings and now wants my house." I raised my voice too. "Don't you dare talk to me like that in my own house." "Your house?" Garland laughed bitterly. "The house I helped renovate. The house that should have gone to me in Flanders. And now you want to give your entire inheritance to an old stranger? It's my house, and I'll dispose of it as I see fit." I could feel the anger coursing through my veins, the blood rushing to my face. "Now get out! Now!" Garland stepped closer to me, his eyes narrowed with rage. "You're gonna regret this, Mom. I'll sue you. I'll prove that you're incompetent, that this old man is manipulating you." "Try it." I looked him straight in the eye, never backing away. Suddenly, the room began to spin before my eyes. A sharp pain pierced the left side of my head as if someone had stabbed me with a red-hot rod. I tried to grab the back of the chair, but my arm wouldn't budge. The last thing I remembered was Garland's terrified face and his scream, "Mom? Mom, what's wrong?" And then darkness. I came to my senses in the hospital. The bright light hurt my eyes, my mouth was dry, and the left side of my body felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. I tried to speak, but my tongue wouldn't listen, making only unintelligible sounds. "Hush, hush," the nurse leaned over me. "You're in the hospital. You've had a stroke. The doctor will be here soon." Stroke. The word echoed in my head. I knew the risks of Parkinson's, but I hoped I could avoid this bowl. The doctor confirmed the diagnosis, a moderate ischemic stroke. The left side of the body is partially paralyzed, speech is impaired, but the prognosis is relatively favorable. "With proper rehabilitation, you can regain most of your functions," he said, "but it will take time and patience." For the first few days, I drifted between dream and reality, with little awareness of what was happening around me. Nurses, injections, IVs, blood pressure readings, everything merged into one endless stream of unpleasant procedures. On the third day, As my consciousness became clearer, I heard familiar voices outside my room. Garland and Brisley were talking to the doctor in the hallway, thinking I was asleep or couldn't hear them. "What are the chances of a full recovery?" Garland asked. "At her age and the accompanying Parkinson's, it's hard to say," the doctor answered. "She may be able to walk with the help of a walker, partially regain her speech. But living on her own, I wouldn't count on it." "I see." Garland's voice sounded strangely satisfied. "When can she be transported home? Or perhaps to a specialized institution?" "It's too early to say. First, we need to stabilize her condition, then we need to start rehabilitation." Of course," Garland interrupted. "But we want to be prepared. My wife and I have, certain plans." When the doctor left, Brisley spoke more softly, but I could still hear every word through the tightly closed door. "She can't live alone now. She'll have to sell the house." "Yes," Garland agreed. "I've already contacted Jenkins at the real estate office. He says that even in its present condition, the house and the lot are worth a lot of money. And if we split it up and sell it piecemeal, we could get even more. And the workshop? There's a lot of old junk in there. You could sell the tools to collectors or to an old tool store. They're vintage, handmade, and they're in high demand right now. We'll throw the rest away." I lay there, paralyzed not so much by the stroke as by the cold calculation of my children. They'd already divided my life, my house, my things, not even waiting for me to die or even leave the hospital. "Do you think she changed her will?" Brisley asked. "After all that consultation with the lawyer?" "Even if she did, it doesn't matter now," Garland sounded confident. "After the stroke, it would be easy to prove that she was incapacitated. And given her condition, we'll have to take over her finances and her estate, legally." "And no Quintus can interfere?" "Let him try," Garland grinned. "I've already consulted a lawyer. As next of kin, we have priority custody." When they returned, their faces changed instantly to expressions of concern and sympathy. "Mom, are you awake?" Garland walked over to the bed. "How are you feeling?" I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I needed time. Time to regain my strength. Time to come up with a plan. At the rehab center, the days dragged on slowly and monotonously. Physical therapy, speech therapy exercises, occupational therapy, an endless round of treatments designed to restore functions I used to take for granted. Learning to speak again, to hold a spoon, to button a button. It was humiliating and exhausting, but I had a goal that gave me strength even in the most difficult moments: to return home and protect what was mine. The doctors predicted a minimum of 2 months of rehabilitation before discharge, but I was determined to cut that time in half. Every day, I worked out beyond my allotted time, doing extra exercises in my room. Quintus visited me almost every day, bringing me home-cooked meals, books, news from the outside world. It was from him that I learned that Garland had already begun to act. "He came to your house with some kind of van," Quint reported during one of his visits. "He told the neighbors he was taking some things into storage to make room for the medical equipment you'd need when you were discharged." "And what did he take?" My voice still sounded a little slurred, but I could already form complete sentences. "Mostly from the workshop. Some tools, boxes of materials. I'd intervene, but he's your son, and technically he has the right." "He doesn't have any right." I felt the anger give me strength. "This is my house and my stuff, and I'm not dead yet, no matter what Garland has planned." Quintus nodded understandingly. "What do you want to do?" "Get out of here, for starters, sooner than they expect." With the help of Quint and Cliff's lawyer, we devised a plan. Officially, I was supposed to stay in rehab for at least 3 more weeks, but my doctor, impressed with my progress and hearing about my son's situation, agreed to discharge me sooner on the condition that I continue outpatient rehab. "You are medically stable enough to recover at home," he said as I signed the papers. "But you will need help at home. You won't be able to live completely on your own anytime soon." "I will have help," I assured him. The day I was discharged, Quint came to pick me up in his old pickup truck. I left the rehab center with conflicting feelings, relieved to be home and anxious about what might be waiting for me there. My house looked exactly as I remembered it, but it felt different. It was as if someone had gone through it, moving things around, rearranging them, disrupting the order that had been established over the years. I went straight to the workshop, leaning on the cane that was now my constant companion. The workshop looked deserted. Many tools were gone, especially the old, valuable, collectible ones. Boxes of rare woods, sets of special varnishes, albums with photos of my work were gone. The workbench, which had always been perfectly organized, was in chaos, as if someone had hastily moved things around with no care for order. You bastard, Quintus said, seeing the look on my face. I'm sorry, Edith, but there's no other way to put it. Call Cliff, I said to Quint. It's time to do something about this. Over the next 2 days, Cliff and I prepared all the necessary paperwork. Since I was physically unable to manage all my affairs due to the effects of the stroke, Quint officially became my trustee, with limited powers that I had clearly defined. Now we need to gather all the interested parties, Cliff said when the last paper was signed. Just as you planned, a family meeting. I called Garland myself. My voice was still a little slurred, but firm enough. Mom? He was clearly shocked. Are you home? When did you get discharged? Yesterday, I answered shortly. I need to talk to you in Flanders about the future. Can you come over tomorrow night? Of course. His voice became immediately caring. I'm so glad you finally realized you need to discuss your situation. Brisley and I were just considering a few options. Tomorrow at 6, I interrupted him. Be there at 6. Flanders reacted less enthusiastically, but she agreed to come for Mom's sake. I knew she was aware of Garland's plans. They always stuck together when it came to potential inheritances. I spent the next day preparing for the meeting. Not physically, my strength was still barely enough for basic actions, but mentally. I rehearsed what I wanted to say, choosing words that weren't driven by anger or resentment. By 6 o'clock that evening, everything was ready. Quint and Cliff had arrived a little earlier, helped set up the chairs in the living room, made tea. I sat down in my favorite chair, putting my file next to me. Garland and Brisley arrived at 6 sharp. Their faces expressed a mixture of surprise and displeasure when they saw Quint and the unfamiliar Cliff. Mom, what's going on? Garland asked, smiling strainedly. We thought this was going to be a family reunion. It is, I replied calmly. This is Mr. Cliff, my lawyer. And you know Quint. Lawyer? Garland cast a quick glance at Brisley. Why would you need a lawyer for a family conversation? You'll figure it out soon enough. Have a seat. Flanders arrived 10 minutes later, out of breath and annoyed. She too was surprised to see strangers, but she remained silent, exchanging glances with Garland. When everyone was seated, I began to speak. Slowly, carefully enunciating my words to overcome the effects of the stroke. I've gathered you here to clear up some questions about my future, and yours too, as far as my property is concerned. Garland stepped forward, his eyes lighting up. We were just about to discuss that, Mom. After your stroke, you need constant care. Brisley and I have prepared a list of excellent boarding houses. I'm not moving to a boarding house, I interrupted him. I'm staying in my house. But Mom, that's impossible, Flanders exclaimed. You can't live alone after a stroke. It's dangerous. I won't live alone. I looked at Quintus. Quint agreed to move into the guest house. He'll be there if I need help. I'm hiring a half-day caregiver for day-to-day care. Garland's face darkened. You're hiring? With what money? Your savings? My savings that you took? I finished the sentence for him. Yeah, they're gone. But I have new sources of income and new plans for the future. I nodded to Cliff, and he pulled a file from his briefcase. Mrs. Malmsteen has asked me to read her new will, which was drafted and probated 3 weeks before her stroke, he said in a formal tone. She wants all interested parties to be aware of her decisions during her lifetime to avoid misunderstandings in the future. A new will? Garland jumped up. What new will? Mom, you can't change a will in your condition. You've had a stroke. You're not… The will was made before the stroke, Mr. Malmsteen, Cliff interrupted him, when your mother was fully competent, as confirmed by a medical report and notarized. If you'll sit down, I'll continue. Garland reluctantly lowered himself into the chair, his face contorted with ill-concealed anger. Cliff began to read out the document in his smooth, professional voice. With each paragraph, my children's faces grew more and more tense. They learned that my house and workshop would be taken over by an educational foundation for young restorers upon my death. My tools, The ones Garland had not yet had time to remove would be given to a local craft school. Some of the money from my consulting work has already been transferred to the Parkinson's Disease Research Foundation. A small trust fund has been set up for my grandchildren for education, which they will not have access to until they reach the age of 18, and to which neither Garland nor Flanders will have anything to do. What about us? Flanders asked in a trembling voice when Cliff paused. Your children? You will each receive 10% of the remaining funds after all the other conditions of the will have been met, Cliff replied, looking at the document. Provided you do not contest Mrs. Malmsteen's will. If you attempt to contest the will, you automatically forfeit that share as well. Garland looked as if he had been struck. It's not fair. He turned to me. Mom, we're your children. You're direct heirs. You can't just give everything to strangers. I can, I said calmly. And I did. It's my property, earned by my labor, and I will dispose of it as I see fit. But why? Flanders looked genuinely confused. What have we done wrong? I looked at my daughter, who really didn't understand. She had always been a wingwoman following Garland without thinking of the consequences. You've stopped seeing me as a person, Flanders. I've become nothing more than a burden to you, then a property to be divided. You and Garland have already planned my life and death without asking my opinion. That is not true, she protested, but I could see in her eyes that she knew I was right. Amber told me about your plans to move into my house when I was sent to the old folks' home, I continued, and Garland had already started moving my stuff out before I died. I was doing it for your own good, Garland was outraged. To make room for medical equipment. Don't lie. I looked him straight in the eye. You took my most valuable tools. The ones that wouldn't interfere with the medical equipment. The ones that could be sold to collectors. Garland fell silent, realizing he'd been caught red-handed. I want a competency evaluation, he finally said, changing tactics. After the stroke, you can't make an adequate assessment of the situation. You've been influenced by outsiders. He cast a baleful glance at Quintus. You can try, Mr. Malmsteen, Cliff intervened, but keep in mind that your mother underwent a full medical examination before making the will. We have a videotape of the signing process and the testimony of witnesses who have no personal interest in the inheritance. In addition, the legal process will be long and expensive, and if you lose even the 10% you're currently guaranteed. Garland looked cornered. He turned to me, his face contorted with rage. You're going to regret this, Mom. We're your family, the only people close to you, and you're choosing outsiders. No, Garland, I shook my head. I choose me. For the first time in years, I'm doing what I think is right, not what is convenient for you. Flandre cried, but I knew her tears were not so much from grief as from frustration. She, like Garland, had counted on the inheritance that was now slipping from her hands. We're leaving. Garland took his wife under his arm and pulled her toward the door. Flanders, are you coming? She lowered her head and followed Garland. At the door, she turned around. Can we visit you? The door is always open to you, I answered, but only as guests, not as hosts. When they left, I felt not triumph, but a strange desolation. It was as if I had finished a long, grueling restoration job, but the result was not what I had expected. Not better or worse, just different. Are you okay? Quintus asked, sitting down next to me. Yeah, I smiled at him. Just tired. It had been a long day. Over the next few weeks, I gradually recovered, both physically and emotionally. I continued my rehabilitation, working with a speech therapist and a physical therapist. My left side was still weaker than my right side, and my speech sometimes became slurred, especially when I was tired. But I was getting stronger every day. At the same time, I started a new project. With the help of Quint and Maurice, I organized a series of workshops for young restorers. Not practical, my hands were no longer capable of showing the fine work, but theoretical. I shared the knowledge I had accumulated over decades of work, how to determine the age and origin of an object, how to choose the right materials for restoration, how to preserve authenticity without sacrificing functionality. The first workshop was held in my workshop, which Quint and I had converted into a small teaching studio. 6 people showed up, not many, but enough to start. Among them was a young guy, Toby, with an extraordinary talent and passion for woodworking. He reminded me of myself as a young man, just as enthusiastic, just as much of a perfectionist. That evening, sitting on the veranda with Quint, I watched the sunset and felt strangely peaceful. My hands trembled more than ever, my body weakened by the stroke. But my spirit, my will, they were stronger than ever. You know, I said, looking at the horizon, all my life I've been restoring old things, bringing them back to their beauty and value. But only now, at the end of my journey, have I finally learned the most important restoration of all, restoring my dignity. Quintus shook my trembling hand in silence. Words were not needed. We both knew. Some things couldn't be repaired, the relationship with my children, my health, the time that could never come back. But some things could be preserved and passed on to others. Knowledge, wisdom, a legacy of mastery. And that may have been my last, most important restoration project.